You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 29th of April. BNP stands 8 candidates in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. When do children cease being election pledges for politicians and a statistic for papers? Baroness Vasi and the demons of hate. How anti-racism lessons increase pupil intolerance by causing animosity to other cultures. Anti-white racism trial begins in France. Last pieces of one World Trade Center are rising. Iraq shuts down 10 television channels. US has no proof of Syrian use of chemicals weapons. Thought for the day, the elephant is still invisible. And finally, noddy dog or village idiot. UK news. British National Party stands 8 candidates in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. The British National Party, with 8 candidates, is contesting every seat in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. The party has set up stalls on Bromsgrove High Street as part of its drive for votes, and the BNP spokesperson told the Bromsgrove Standard it was going very well. He added people they'd spoken to thought Bromsgrove was a nice place and wanted to keep it that way. The British National Party spokesperson went on to say, immigration is obviously a topic of conversation with many Bromsgrove residents, relieved that they have someone to confide in without the threat of arrest or dismissal from work merely for expressing their concerns. Most striking though was the real financial suffering being inflicted on people struggling to pay their bills and taxes, whilst at the same time David Cameron arrogantly announces that the foreign aid budget is being ring-fenced. Number one on our campaign agenda is British people come first. We aim to inform the electorate about the cuts to our schools, hospitals, including life-saving medicines and other local services, whilst £5 billion a year is given away via foreign aid. This is nothing short of anti-English racism. World at 8 comments. True, let's hope the Brits don't continue to shoot themselves in the foot every election time. When do children cease being election pledges for politicians and a statistic for the papers? Children's Minister, Conservative Edward Timpson, condemns children taken into care being sent away from their home area following the Rochdale grooming scandal and an NSPCC report showing almost 8,000 children went missing from care. He says rules on whether children can be placed in care homes far away from family and friends are to be overhauled. The Telegraph, referring to their report, Paedophiles know more about children's homes than the police, MPs warn, stated MPs warned last year that grooming rings, similar to the gang which operated in Rochdale, could be targeting vulnerable children all over the country, unnoticed by the authorities in part because of lax monitoring of those who disappear even for short periods. The NSPCC reports at least 7,900 children went missing from care last year. This is based on data obtained from 29 of the 43 police forces who responded in full to their request under the Freedom of Information Act. The total is almost 8 times the official government estimate from the Department for Education that fewer than 1,000 children went missing from care. The Telegraph went on to mention a parliamentary report last year warned that those who do go missing are routinely written off by carers, social workers and police as troublesome and promiscuous, or even slags who should know better. While Timpson blamed the current system for allowing thousands of children a year to be sent to care homes in different parts of the country away from their usual support circles and making it almost impossible for caseworkers to keep track of them, making this an out of sight, out of mind culture that has led to thousands of the most vulnerable children being placed at greater distances from their hometowns. It further stated that Mr Timpson disclosed that under new rules, which are being put out to consultation, councils will only be able to send a child to another area if it is clear that it is in their best interests, and the decision will have to be personally authorised by the head of social services. Tom Rahili, head of the NSPCC's Looked After Children programme, said, "The state needs to be a parent for these children. Repeatedly going missing should be a big warning sign, as this kind of behaviour can put them at serious risk of harm, such as grooming or sexual exploitation. Otherwise, in the words of one of our young boys in care, they're dead to the world." World at 8 says, The poor lad couldn't have spoken truer words, dead to the world. From other sources we learnt that police forces in England and Wales recorded over 28,000 such incidents and some children running away from care dozens of times. At least 2,959 of the children went missing more than once, with some absconding on 35 occasions. In one instance, a child vanished on 67 occasions. Children's Rights Director Dr Roger Morgan told the inquiry, "If you ask me how many children run from care, I don't think anyone knows the answer to that, and that is a major concern." World Aid has spoken many times on the lack of truly caring for our children, and the politicians and newspapers trot them out to gain a vote and a headline as needed, and then put them back on the shelf until the next time. Timpson's consultation will drag on and quietly disappear or be watered down after the elections, or he will be replaced like his predecessor and these children will still remain at risk. Baroness Varzi and the demons of hate. Baroness Varzi, Cabinet Minister for Faith and Communities, spoke at a meeting of a group which is boycotted by her own government for its promotion of terrorist recruiters and its failure to fully challenge terrorist and extremist ideology. Baroness Varzi addressed an event staged by the Federation of Student Islamic Studies, FOSIS, last month to attack the demonisation of Muslim students by the media. FOSIS has hosted numerous extremists and terrorist speakers at its annual conference and other events, including Azim Tamimi, who supports suicide bombing, Hatim al-Haddad, who believes that music is a prohibited and fake message of love and peace, and Anwar al-Awalki, an al-Qaeda recruiter described as a key inspiration for 3 of the 9/11 hijackers and numerous later attacks. Baroness Varzi was joined at the event by Nicola Dandridge, the head of Universities UK, which represents all British universities. She too claimed that extremism was no greater a problem in universities than anywhere else and praised FOSIS for its work on community cohesion. Baroness Varzi's involvement with FOSIS comes more than 2 years after David Cameron, the Prime Minister, promised to cut off public funding for and political contact with groups which supported extremism. However, accounts published in recent weeks reveal that many bodies closely linked to extremism continue to enjoy substantial public funding in 2012. Beneficiaries include the East London Mosque, paid at least £150,000 last year alone, and the Osmani Trust, which received around £600,000. World Date states, "The true obscenity here is that this Muslim bitch is allowed to be faith minister in a non-Muslim country, her host country. Never mind all the money that's thrown at these disgusting people. Demons of hate, they ain't seen nothing yet. Al Jazeera quote me." European news. How anti-racism lessons increase pupil intolerance by causing animosity to other cultures. Counterproductive. A Dutch study has found children who are given anti-racism lessons in school are more likely to be intolerant outside the classroom. It said that accusing white pupils of racism causes animosity, and discussing sensitive ethnic concerns such as honour killings paints minority group children in a bad light. The survey said children who live in mixed neighbourhoods are often free of hostility towards other racial groups, but it found that when more attention in class is being paid to the multicultural society, the liberalising effect of positive contact in class on youngsters' xenophobic attitude decreases. In almost the next breath, it said the teaching of multiculturalism had an unexpected negative effect. It added, the impact of positive inter-ethnic contact in class disappears or even reverses when multiculturalism is more emphasised during lessons. Our World Date writer comments, "Confusing to you? It is to me. I've never believed in the leftist view of genocidal multicultural society. It proves that one can practice multiculturalism, but to tell people about it just highlights how bad it has fared. Just as awful, although easier to understand, is the absurdity of the article on teachers should give lessons in pornography and tell pupils it's not all bad, experts say. Now that does take the proverbial, doesn't it?" Anti-white racism trial begins in France. The trial of a 29-year-old accused of racially motivated attack on a white man in a Paris metro station began at a courthouse in the French capital on Friday, in a legal case being backed by a leading anti-racism group. According to the prosecution, the accused man assaulted the victim after first using a string of racial slurs, including sale français, dirty Frenchman, and sale blanc, dirty white. It's also alleged that he used a broken bottle as a weapon during the attack, which took place in 2010. While this is not the first accusation of incidents of so-called anti-white racism in France, the latest case is the first to have been backed by a leading anti-racism group, the International League Against Racism and Anti-Semitism, LICRA, which is supporting the prosecution. In an interview with French radio station RFI, LICRA Vice President Philippe Schmitt said he believes there was clearly a racial dimension to the attack. The victim was insulted because he's white, said Schmitt. World at 8. And once again the French lead the way. This is a clear case of ethnic anti-white hatred. We are increasingly unlikely to see the same in today's Britain, rather more some ethnic pulling the race card to our monetary cost. World news. Last pieces of One World Trade Center are rising. The One World Trade Center already in New York's tallest building, and when the last pieces of its spire rise to the roof, the 104-floor skyscraper that replaces the fallen Twin Towers will be just feet from becoming the highest in the Western Hemisphere. Overlooking the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, the high-rise is scheduled to be open for business in 2014. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey says the spire pieces plus a steel beacon will then be lifted at a later date from the rooftop to cap the building at 1,776 feet. Installation of the 800-ton, 400-foot spire began in December after 18 pieces were shipped from Canada and New Jersey. The spire will serve as a world-class broadcast antennae. With the beacon at its peak to ward off aircraft, the spire will provide public transmission services for television and radio broadcast channels that were destroyed on September the 11th, 2001, along with the world-famous Trade Center towers and the loss of over 3,000 innocent lives. As officials prepared to erect the spire, the office of the city's chief medical examiner was working in the hidden alley where debris may still contain human remains. World Date states, this was an act of terrorism towards the West and as such should be remembered. It could have happened in the UK and in fact is still an accident waiting to happen, lest we forget. Iraq shuts down 10 television channels. Baghdad. The Iraqi government ordered 10 predominantly Sunni Muslim satellite television channels to cease broadcasting Sunday, accusing them of encouraging the sectarian unrest that left more than 200 people dead in a week of violence in northern Iraq. The stations included the pan-Arab news channel Al Jazeera and other well-known local satellite stations. The move reflected the elevated tensions in the country since fighting erupted last week between Shiite Muslim-led security forces and Sunni Arab protesters, raising fears of a new civil war like the one that erupted from 2005 to 2008 when US troops were still in the country, and who incidentally got the blame from the media. The ban was announced on state television and letters of notification were delivered to the television companies. It was not the first time the Iraqi government has shut the offices of satellite channels, including Al Jazeera and a well-known local station, Al-Shakia. Similar closures occurred during the American occupation. World at 8. Shame it hasn't happened here. Of course it'd be no great loss. The media and government all hum to essentially the same tune. But the similarity to the fact that when an Israeli soldier is killed by a Palestinian terrorist, the killer becomes the freedom fighter isn't lost on me. US has no proof of Syrian use of chemical weapons. Pentagon Chief Chuck Hagel said US efforts to determine whether the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons is a serious business that can't be rushed just because a number of countries believe evidence supports that conclusion. He was speaking on the sidelines of an official visit to Cairo, during which he discussed the Syrian crisis and other matters with the Egyptian authorities. Suspicions are one thing, evidence is another, Hagel warned. I think we have to be very careful here before we make any conclusions and draw any conclusions based on real intelligence, he emphasised. That's not at all questioning other nations' intelligence. But the United States relies on its own intelligence, he added, denying that Washington is losing credibility because it is still assessing information on use of chemical arsenals by Bashar al-Assad, while allies such as France, Britain and Israel have concluded evidence suggesting chemical arms have been used in Syria's conflict. They were faster, admitting Hegel, who added, "I don't think you judge these kinds of serious matters based on a timeline." World at 8, they were faster. I guess he was just implying we'll get the proof when we need it. Just like they did with Saddam's invisible weapons of mass destruction. The piper may have changed, but the tune remains boringly the same. Makes you wonder who is writing the tune and why it can't be banned. If chemical weapons are being used in Syria, it is a broad spectrum of the word if. That is, if the rebels are using it, the West will turn a blind eye. But if Assad is using it, they will invade. Of course, it could be that both sides are using them, in which case let them get on with it. On another note, if no one is using them, they're just whipping up the smallest hint of use as an excuse to put foreign troops who will really F up the country, as indeed they did in Libya and Iraq, as Egyptians do it really quite well by themselves. Thought for the day: is this elephant still in the room? The elephant in this case is of course the Muslim grooming scandal, which hasn't gone away in this country, although you might think it has, judging from the national newspapers, that is. Now, wearing my pro-fam hat, I read an article in the Reader's Digest January. You might think I've spent a long time ignoring it, but I haven't. My excuse is that I have my limited amount of Reader's Digest mags, for which I didn't ask and had to cancel in February, in the spare loo downstairs. This is primarily my better half's place to hide from me, so I haven't seen much of the publications in his little hidey hole. Well, that's my excuse anyway. There is an article in this edition on stopping the traffic, telling the story of Sister Anit-Racism, who has saved hundreds of women from prostitution. The articles highlight, amongst others, 25-year-old Shad from Nigeria. Her Aunt Bisi sent her to the UK, and from then on she was taken to a heavily fortified house in the north of England, where a succession of men were brought into her room, ostensibly so her fare could be paid back. She escaped and took shelter in a safe house run by the good sister. Now, although her story, along with many others, is horrific, she's an older girl and the actual root of the matter was ignored even in this article. The root is, who is actually in charge and making money out of these girls and women? The sister, and I have a lot of time for nuns having been educated mainly in convents, has stated that she came across an underworld supermarket. If you have the money you can get anything you want, young or old, male or female, and any nationality. But she ignores or is not allowed to print the ethnicities or religions of those who profit from this misery. I find this very disturbing, especially as she states that even if the police find the trafficked victims, they can't be sent home. They need safe housing and legal advice, all very expensive and a drain on the UK economy if truth be told. The traffickers don't give a rat's arse, because not only do they get rid of shop-soiled girls, but they get away with no financial liability or justice. A win-win situation for them. Now, a hint of the ethnicity of some of these gangs, apart from the prime ones who are of course the Muslims from our Pakistani and Bangladeshi ghettos, and point towards the main bulk of our Eastern European migrants, the Albanians. Sister Anit-Racism cites Ada, a 25-year-old Albanian currently in a safe house occupied by 60 other people. Her boyfriend brought her to England for a better life, raped her and put her out on the streets. Now she's learning English at college and will no doubt marry and produce more little Albanians. Girls nowadays, whatever their country, should realise that the groomers are very clever and not emotionally involved in their charges at all. It's a business, and a very lucrative one, especially when landing your goods in a country that can't send them back home and has to provide them with better coping facilities than our own girls or women get when groomed, abducted, raped or pimped out. Sad but true, Sister Teresa should concentrate more on her own tribe, I feel, than helping out foreign girls who've got themselves into trouble. These Eastern European countries have TV, papers and the web, get real. Red Nose Day, to be ignored by any good nationalist, also funds the Medial Trust, which deals in a diverse clientele and is headed by the good sister. Now, the Albanians are the crux of the crime epidemic in parts of North London, which even the police are ignoring, and despite the guns angle and general horribleness of their goings-on, they also do a roaring trade in prostitutes, and the term grooming can be applied to them, although in a more direct way. As early as 2002 there were unreported shootouts in London between rival Albanian gangs, and fairly recently 4 Albanians in Norfolk were given light jail sentences for supplying £750,000 of the cocaine on the streets of London. Their names were Roland Lamy, Elis Zafiri, Preparam Hadami and Indrik Kora. And who did they get to launder their money? An English girl, of course. My point in highlighting Albanians is their history is partially formed by the Ottoman Empire and communism, a fatal and very nasty mixture. If you read through the famous historical characters of Albania, it reads like a Turkish nightmare. Some of the names are Abdil Fashiri, Mohammed Ali Pasha, Fanes Noli, Ibrahim Ragova, Ali Reza Effendi and more. It's obvious that despite ignoring the religious leanings of some, if not most of our Albanian immigrants, that they share at least a form of Islam with our friends in the north, they of the Muslim grooming scandals, and it would appear that their modus operandi is almost the same. The one point I'm not clear on is whether the Albanian girls they get to come over are of the Islamic faith or part of the 20% Eastern Orthodox or 10% Roman Catholic faiths. If their counterparts in the north and the rest of the UK are to be judged, it's fairly safe to say not, as nowhere is it written or known that a young Muslim girl has been groomed, prostituted or killed except as a form of punishment known within their communities as honour killing. In a census of 2011, 70% of all Albanians in Albania didn't declare any adherence to any particular religion. However, in the CIA World Factbook gives a distribution of 70% Muslim, 20% Eastern Orthodox and 10% Roman Catholicism for Albanians, that is in or out of their mother country. Now we all know that Islam spreads like a rather awful disease and is doing so now, so all the figures you see are already out of date. All places of worship in Albania were closed down in 1967 but reopened in 1990, and I believe it's no accident that the Bosnian War started in 1993. Give a Muslim an inch and he will take a mile or more. On the various websites I visited there have been pictures of Albanian gangsters holding vast quantities of weapons in the UK, and they're well known for bringing in not only illegals as slave labour but girls as well. A little snippet I will read for your clarification, and the attitude of our courts is very interesting. An Albanian car wash owner has been ordered to hand over £60,000 of his criminal earnings after he was found guilty of employing illegal immigrants in the UK and laundering money, the UK Border Agency reports. Defrim Pachi, 32, who owns car washes in Loughborough, Chesterfield, Sutton and in Ashfield and Barrow-on-Furness, was sentenced at Carlisle Crown Court in May 2011 after he admitted illegally employing foreign nationals to work in his car wash businesses across the north of England. On the 21st of May the court issued a confiscation order for £60,000 under the Proceeds of Crime Act. The full amount is to be repaid within 4 months or Pachi will face 18 months in jail. Source News and Star. Defence Counsel Azar Iqbal said, within Albanian culture, family loyalty is to be jealously guarded. When it's breached, it can be a source of violence in the extreme or very bad feelings, at least. Well, that's okay, isn't it? No deportation there because he's a criminal along with the rest of his family. What do we do as a country and a people? Nothing, just about as much as happens when a seemingly unlikely, peaceful and loving Muslim communities rape and murder our children. What makes me so angry is the blatant unfairness of this situation. We, as a party, are blasted for being racist and worse, and yet it's mainly people of different races, cultures and religions who are perpetrating some of the most heinous crimes in our history, and to boot, not being properly brought to justice over it. A few years in a comfy UK prison, with all their fellows pointing their butts to Mecca, having special halal food brought in, and carrying on selling drugs and male butts to fellow prisoners, and probably the warders as well, and they're laughing. Now even in Albania, let alone Qatar, they would face a much shorter and nastier future, especially if they'd raped Islamic girls, but then again they wouldn't be that stupid. Just bring in more non-Muslim youngsters. There was a book written by a girl who'd been groomed and pimped out. She was English of course, but had been taken to Italy by her Albanian lover, who she didn't name through the entire book, just calling him by a nickname, and during the last chapters just thought he was Albanian, as he was part of an international gang of traffickers, which is the polite term for it. Now this trafficking has been going on for generations throughout Europe and Africa, mainly for the harems of wealthy Muslims, And it's still going on under the misnomer of trafficking, which covers all the crimes and terrible goings on that have been perpetrated within the UK for over 30 years, under the generally accepted term Asian grooming, which is the huge white elephant quietly munching away in the corner of all the so-called groups, researchers, reporters and do-gooders in the Western Hemisphere. Can't you see him? The British National Party can and did. And where did that get our party and our chairman? A cock in the snoot is what, and a further ignoring or delegating the problem for another few years, until it got so bad that even the media thought it might cast a fish or two and then forget it. And all the while we were virtually ignored by the media, our governments were still busy importing thousands if not millions of these people to carry out the same crimes and assaults on our culture, family life and religion in the name of Allah. Are our governments mad, bad or just plain sad? All the books allowed in local libraries, all the so-called articles by people raising awareness, all the TV programmes hosted by Islamic girls, or the Panorama or Tonight efforts to jump on the grooming bandwagon are phony attempts to take over or give opinions on a section of society they're not allowed to reveal, or girls who are usually trumped up as vulnerable, which equals stupid, or needy, which equals promiscuous, or in care, which equals parents who don't care. Now in all fairness, some of these youngsters may be all three, but it doesn't mean that their tormentors should get away with it on such an immense scale. The few points for us to remember as a people are: this is a religious hate crime. It destroys families. It destroys our breeding stock. It provides money for drugs and terrorism. It's a deliberate crime against our humanity. It is a crime against our religion and country. Groomers and their families should be deported immediately without sentencing. Our prisons are already too full with migrant crime lords. It spreads diseases. Many of the girls have to undergo amateur abortions or worse. Further cases should be brought to the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. The people perpetrating it are not English. It is a war crime without the state of war existing. We need to make an example of these people so they get the message loud and clear. Whatever your religion or ethnicity, if you cannot live in a country with rules, you will have to leave. But most of all the journalists and writers who ignore it are culpable as well. If it wasn't for the so-called multicultural epidemic amongst our forward thinkers, these crimes against our youth wouldn't be condoned in the first place. We need firm boundaries against foreign migrants and for our own people. Every country in the world is entitled to protect its people. Why are we so different in the UK or Europe? If we were stronger of mind, we wouldn't have these parasites over here in the first place. They would either stay home or go elsewhere to carry out their nefarious practices, and that would suit us just fine, wouldn't it? In fact, if government-backed organisations like the UAF or Hope Not Hate concentrated their pathetic attempts at being patriotic and against the people they really should be wary of, it'd be interesting instead of laughable. Do they really class themselves as patriots or Marxists? Never really quite sure. Maybe they're extraneous after all. And finally, noddy dog or village idiot. It's been reported in the Telegraph that Andrew Mitchinson, 37, who crashed a prized 205-mile-per-hour 6.2 litre Murcielago, can't quite pronounce that one, owned by a millionaire hotel boss Stephen Leahy, leaving it damaged beyond repair, has just been fined £280. Mitchison also rode off a stationary Ford Focus owned by mum of two, Marianne Kitchen, when he skidded in the sports car at high speed on a wet road. Now this bozo is the son of the owner of Station Garage Staveley, Cumbria, at which the Murcielago was being MOT'd on November the 6th last year. Mitchison of Low Skellygill Farm, Windermere, admitted driving without due care and attention. He was fined just £280, ordered to pay court costs of £350, pay a victim surcharge of £30 to Mr Leahy and given 6 penalty points. Afterwards both car owners blasted the sentence. Miss Kitchen said basically all he's got is the equivalent of 2 speeding tickets for trashing 2 cars. Mr Leahy said he was a very, very silly lad and he's been given a slap on the wrist. Peter Bardsley prosecuting said witnesses have seen Mitchison driving the silver 2-door 630 brake horsepower Lamborghini at excessive speed, and due to a combination of a wet road and skidding on a manhole cover, he lost control, left the carriageway for about 40 metres, came back onto it and hit the back of the parked car, said Mr Bardsley. This presenter says, "This is a difficult one. Whilst I abhor the fact this idiot saw a classy and expensive car and thought, I want to drive that and sod the owner, it all went horribly wrong and all our insurances would probably be raised to accommodate the subsequent costs. But in truth, because his father is obviously not wealthy, he's escaped the true cost of this crash, which occurred only through his willfulness and stupidity. What was his father doing letting this village idiot in a customer's car in the first place and on the road? A case of sour grapes and class war gone wrong, methinks." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night. It is British people come first. We aim to inform the electorate about the cuts to our schools, hospitals, including life-saving medicines and other local services, whilst £5 billion a year is given away via foreign aid. This is nothing short of anti-English racism. World at 8 comments, "True, let's hope the Brits don't continue to shoot themselves in the foot every election time." When do children cease being election pledges for politicians and a statistic for the papers? Children's Minister, Conservative Edward Timpson, condemns children taken into care being sent away from their home area following the Rochdale grooming scandal and an NSPCC report showing almost 8,000 children went missing from care. He says rules on whether children can be placed in care homes far away from family and friends are to be overhauled. The Telegraph, referring to their report, "Paedophiles know more about children's homes than the police, MPs warn," stated MPs warned last year that grooming rings, similar to the gang which operated in Rochdale.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday the 29th of April. BNP stands 8 candidates in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. When do children cease being election pledges for politicians and a statistic for papers? Baroness Vasi and the demons of hate. How anti-racism lessons increase pupil intolerance by causing animosity to other cultures. Anti-white racism trial begins in France. Last pieces of one World Trade Center are rising. Iraq shuts down 10 television channels. US has no proof of Syrian use of chemicals weapons. Thought for the day, the elephant is still could be targeting vulnerable children all over the country, unnoticed by the authorities in part because of lax monitoring of those who disappear even for short periods. The NSPCC reports at least 7,900 children went missing from care last year. This is based on data obtained from 29 of the 43 police forces who responded in full to their request under the Freedom of Information Act. The total is almost 8 times the official government estimate from the Department for Education that fewer than 1,000 children went missing from care. The Telegraph went on to mention a parliamentary report last year warned that those who do go missing are routinely written off by carers, social workers and police as troublesome and promiscuous, or even slags who should know better. While Timpson blamed the current system for allowing thousands of children a year to be sent to care homes in different parts of the country away from their usual support circles and making it almost impossible for caseworkers to keep track of them, making this an out of sight, out of mind culture that has led to thousands of the most vulnerable children being placed at greater distances from their hometowns. It further stated that Mr Timpson disclosed that under new rules, which are being put out to consultation, councils will only be able to send a child to another area if it is clear that it is in their best interests, and the decision will have to be personally authorised by the head of social services. Tom Rahili, head of the NSPCC's Looked After Children programme, said, "The state needs to be a parent for these children. Repeatedly going missing should be a big warning sign, as this kind of behaviour can put them at serious risk of harm, such as grooming or sexual exploitation. Otherwise, in the words of one of our young boys in care, they're dead to the world." World at 8 says, "The poor lad couldn't have spoken truer words. Dead to the world." From other sources we learnt that police forces in England and Wales recorded over 28,000 such incidents and some children running away from care dozens of times. At least 2,959 of the children went missing more than once, with some absconding on 35 occasions. Still invisible. And finally, noddy dog or village idiot. UK news. British National Party stands 8 candidates in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. The British National Party, with 8 candidates, is contesting every seat in Worcestershire's Bromsgrove division. The party has set up stalls on Bromsgrove High Street as part of its drive for votes, and the BNP spokesperson told the Bromsgrove Standard it was going very well. He added people they'd spoken to thought Bromsgrove was a nice place and wanted to keep it that way. The British National Party spokesperson went on to say, immigration is obviously a topic of conversation with many Bromsgrove residents, relieved that they have someone to confide in without the threat of arrest or dismissal from work merely for expressing their concerns. Most striking though was the real financial suffering being inflicted on people struggling to pay their bills and taxes, whilst at the same time David Cameron arrogantly announces that the foreign aid budget is being ring-fenced. Number 1 on our campaign agenda